Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Metaphysical Bible Hangout. I'm Reverend Sherri James, and I'm the Senior Minister of Understanding Principles Church. And I'm really excited to be here. We're in this incredible study. We are walking through a student's guide to the Hebrew Scriptures. This is Reverend Mary Tompkins, one of she has many works, but this is one of the ones that really just resonated with me. I mean, she was who gave me my love of the Bible. I didn't even know I loved the Bible. That was a whole new concept to me. I feel like I respected the Bible. I feel like I can say that, but I don't know that I necessarily had a love of the Bible. And she really awakened that in me, and so I've been on this quest. And even today, I've just been sitting thinking, God, I need a way to go deeper, because this is something that I want to be known for. But I don't mean known like famous, but I mean known like, you know how that people know you for something, they come to you for something. And we went to Reverend Mary for Bible, and at least as far as our organization, we have a lot of really strong Bible teachers. I mean, really, really just powerful Bible teachers. And, anyone will tell you in New Thought that UFBL, we have the strongest teachers, because we're just a heavy influence on how to teach, how to preach, how to share this message. But I don't know if anybody has said, I'm going to make Bible my area of specialty. And so I've been thinking about that. It's soon going to be time, if not overdue time, to apply to graduate school and do somebody's PhD program and continue that specialization. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's not what tonight's conversation is about. Tonight's conversation is about Deuteronomy. Yeah, Lita says Reverend Mary was the bomb.com, and she was more, all of that in a bag of chips. She could change your life in a sentence. So I pray for that gift. So let's just take a moment. I want to give you guys a prayer practice. This is a prayer practice that I learned when I took the prayer chaplain training with Reverend Leilani Bird, who pioneered this training in Unity. And a number of our Universal Foundation for Better Living churches use her prayer program as part of our prayer chaplaincy. And it's an 8-step prayer program, and I'll put it in an email if you guys want it. I'll put it in a blog post if you're interested. But what the 8-step prayer process is that it's a 2-minute process, and she always gives us these little timers, and she says you have 2 minutes. If you're praying for longer than 2 minutes, you're praying too long. Basically, make the contact, get in, get out, pray, get it done. And so she would have us set these timers, and then we would go through the prayer process. So I'm going to give you the 8 steps, and then we're going to do it, open the class, and then get into Deuteronomy. And we're starting on page 41. So the first thing is to just take a deep breath. And you breathe in through the nostrils and breathe out through the nostrils. Breathe in. And then what you do is you move your attention from your head to your heart. Now, she calls it the 18-inch journey. And you may even want to put your hands over your heart, because it'll help center your attention there. But what it does is that it moves your attention into the heart space. It's a physical thing as well as a metaphorical thing. So it's to go to your heart. So it's to breathe, then go to your heart. Step 2 is go to your heart. So you bring your attention to the heart. And then what you want to do is just this is inside of you, all of this is silent. Then you want to call on the name of God by whatever name you know God. Some people refer to God as Papa. Some Reverend Della called God Daddy. I have one of my members, she calls God Father, Mother, Spirit, Divine. Another, Mae McCarthy, calls God CSO, her Chief Spiritual Officer. So another person, I've heard different names. By whatever name you call God, that's what you're looking for. And so you call on God by whatever name you call God. And what you want to acknowledge is that God is greater. No matter what the appearance is, God is greater. So that's step 3. So 1 is breathe, then go to your heart, then call on God and acknowledge God as the only presence. And thank you. Alita says Lord and Keeper. Exactly. So in yourself, you would acknowledge Lord and Keeper, you're greater than any appearance. You're greater than any expression, that you are my potential. Excuse me for that. Then step 4, you just want to listen. There's a quiet where you're listening for the right words. Now, in a prayer chaplain instance, you're saying God is greater because someone is coming to you with an appearance. You know, my child just passed away and I'm racked with grief, or my mom is going into hospice and they're saying she doesn't have much time. But again, okay, thank you, VJ. I will put that out. I'll post it on my on the Facebook page. So I'll put it there after we finish. And so, but this for you, it can be whatever you're praying about. Maybe you've got a decision that you've got to make, and you need to acknowledge that God is greater. And then step 4 is to listen. Just listening, and you're listening for the right words to speak on behalf of whatever the prayer is. And then you begin to pray. And the prayer is whatever words come. There are no right or wrong words. You're just praying, whatever that is. And it could be something as simple as, God, you know I need some food to eat. You know, God, you know it's not your will that I suffer. You know, send me some money now. Whatever. I mean, I'm being irreverent on purpose. It's not. You don't have to have. There's no such thing as the right words. It's just the words that resonate in your soul. And then you release the prayer. You know, a lot of times we pray, but we never let go of the prayer, meaning that we're still trying to dictate how the prayer will come about. And a lot of times prayer, and I'm a witness to this, prayer will be answered and we will have forgotten the prayer we prayed. The prayer may not come in the timeline that we were looking, so we thought God said no and we moved on. And then the answer came and we're walking with the answer to the prayer and we didn't even realize we got the prayer answered. And then, you know, after you release the prayer, then you just give thanks. Gratitude is the language of the universe. You know, what are you grateful for? Gratitude is the key that unlocks God's strong box. So you want to express gratitude. It could be gratitude for anything. It really doesn't matter. It could be gratitude for just your breath. You know, it could be gratitude for your children or your family or your job or your spouse or whatever that is. And then close the prayer. Amen. So I'm going to go again and then we're going to do it. I'm going to model it. So step 1 is breathe. Go to your heart. Call on the name of God by whatever name you call. Listen. So you're listening for the right words. Then pray. Then say what you heard. Listen. Then say what you heard. And then step 5 is to release the prayer. Let go of what you said. And then give thanks for what you said. And then close out what you said. Okay. All right. And I'll put this on the Facebook page as soon as we finish. All right. So we're going to model that. So the first thing is to take that deep breath. And I'm going to set the timer. One more time. Take another deep breath. And then let your attention travel to your heart space. And if you need to, move your hands to the heart space to help you focus there. And inwardly, you want to call on the name of God. And then listen. And then the prayer. Father, Mother God, I thank you for this class. I thank you that you have something to impart to your people through this study of Deuteronomy. I ask that you utilize what has been planned to give whomever needs the breakthrough their breakthrough, whomever needs the transformation their transformation, whoever needs the reassurance and the confirmation, God, let this class be that for them. I thank you, God, for the men and women that will find this class long after we have taped it. And I just speak a special prayer for their lives, God. I just bless them to be all that you have created them to be. And I thank God for what you are doing in their lives. Now I let this prayer go. I release it. And I trust that what I've asked for is going to come to pass. And I give thanks in advance. I move forward with a spirit of excitement, enthusiasm, and expectancy. In the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ, I affirm that this is so, and so it is, and that's how I let it be. Amen and Ashe. Great. The whole thing, BJ, the Elita, is two things. Two minutes, excuse me, 2 minutes. So this is a 2-minute timer. If you guys want to buy these, I have these available for sale. This is a 2-minute timer. All right. Make sure this is up. Okay, we're at the top of page 41. And so we're talking about Deuteronomy. Now, I've got a lot of notes on Deuteronomy. So if you guys are okay, I'm going to go right up to 8 o'clock. And if you'll give me just a few extra minutes, because I got a lot of stuff. And I think we may run past maybe 5 minutes, but hopefully not too much longer than that. All right. So Deuteronomy, which means second law, Deuteronomos, it's a Greek word that means second law. It is unique in the Pentateuch in its consistent and uniform style. And what we mean by that is that whereas in the other books in the Torah, where we saw evidence of multiple schools of thought, I mean, multiple names for God, multiple approaches to God, different references that indicated different time periods, with Deuteronomy, it's different in the sense that it's way more consistent in its style. And what's interesting about it is that the other 4 books have an anonymous narrator, and Deuteronomy is unique in that it has a consistent narrator, and that narrator is Moses. And so it consists almost entirely of Moses's sermons. That's what goes in that blank. It consists almost entirely of Moses's sermons to the Israelites before they entered the promised land. So it's the second law. The other 4 books have an anonymous narrator, but Deuteronomy is written almost entirely in the first person, is written as if Moses is talking. And it is, there are many reasons. I think probably the way that Deuteronomy is written, it's written in a way that suggests Mosaic authorship. But we're going to talk about some ways that the book probably reveals that Moses is not the author. Okay, so let's talk about the storyline. So Moses addressed the Israelites near the eastern shore of the Jordan River. Moses addressed the Israelites near the eastern shore of the Jordan River, recounting their experiences together during the 40 years in the wilderness. So what you see is that from the introduction to about chapter 4, verse 43, is Moses' first speech. It's the first speech that he gives. Now, something I want to tell you about Moses. Moses is a central figure from Exodus to Deuteronomy. He is probably the most prominent character in these books of the Bible. So you got kind of the middle the beginning of Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy. So you're about 4 of 5 books as far as the Torah or the Pentateuch is concerned, and he's the central character. He becomes like a paradigm for Israel's leaders to follow. And so you'll always see leaders being compared to Moses. They call Jesus the new Moses. There was all this comparison to the law that Jesus brought versus the law that Moses brought. And there were schools of thought that suggested that Jesus came to get rid of or sidestep the Mosaic law and to present the new law, which was freedom in Christ. So Moses is a paradigmatic leader for Israel, and he's like a blueprint for other leaders. So, all right, great. So let me go back to this. So what happens in the next thing in the storyline, so it restates the 10 commandments, and it urged Israel to love and fear God. It urged Israel to love and to fear God. In a major address, where we are with chapters 5 through 11, let me go back. So where we are with Deuteronomy chapter 5 through 11, we're into Moses' second speech, just so you know. We're into Moses' second speech. His second speech is probably the longest speech. It goes from chapter 4, verse 44 to chapter 28, verse 6. And so the first part of that, chapters 5 through 11, are all about love and fear God. Love and fear God, love and fear God. Now, number 3. In a major address, he laid down guidelines for Israel's worship. That's what goes in that blank. He laid down guidelines for Israel's worship that specified the place to worship, whom to worship, and when to worship. He gave rules for family and community life and also defined the public offices of king, prophet, and priest. So the second speech is chapters at the end of chapter 4 all the way to like the very beginning of chapter 28. But chapters 444 to like chapter 11, or roughly chapter 5 to chapter 11, what you get is you get about love and fear God. And then what you get in the rest of it, chapter 12 through 26, is that you get basically this focus on how worship is to happen. And what's interesting about that is that it's a central portion of the laws, and it's actually thought to be the earliest core of the book. And it repeats a lot of what has already been revealed legislation. So the reason they call Deuteronomy, second law, is because it restates a lot of what has been heard in Leviticus and Numbers that was already revealed in other sources. But interestingly enough, Deuteronomy makes some really interesting changes. What we find in the Deuteronomic school of thought is that whereas Leviticus and Numbers are way more legalistic, Deuteronomy brings in this human element, and there's a real deep concern for humankind, and we'll talk about that. Moses solemnized or made serious, solemnized the occasion with covenant renewal. That's what we see in chapter 27. There's a covenant renewal ceremony using curses and blessings. Moses solemnized the occasion with covenant renewal using curses and blessings. Basically, it's this really passionate speech in Deuteronomy 28 where he is saying, choose life. Choose life. It's one of the most popular areas that's quoted in any denomination, where he encourages you to choose life. And most of us know that the version of that from Joshua, because we quote it all the time, choose you this day whom you will serve. But remember, Moses is a paradigmatic leader. He's like the paradigm for Israel's leader. So there's a lot of what happens with Joshua that's basically painting him in the light, or to be like the next Moses, like almost like a carbon copy of Moses. In this sermon, in his third sermon, which is in chapter 31, so the third sermon is from like chapter 29 to chapter 31, chapter 30, excuse me. Chapter 31 is like appendices. And so he authorizes Joshua as his successor. He authorized Joshua as his successor. So Joshua is what goes in that blank. In chapter 32, there's what they call Moses' song, and he recounted God's experience with Israel in song. He recounted God's experience with Israel in songs. It's like a retelling of the history. Again, what we're doing is going through the storyline. In chapter 33, he blessed the tribes. In chapter 33, he blessed the tribes. In chapter 34, you see where Moses ascended Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is what goes in that blank, and died after seeing but not entering the promised land. He ascends Mount Nebo, and on Mount Nebo, God actually shows him the promised land. God shows him the land that he's not going to get to be a part of. And then Moses dies. And in that chapter, he also gives his reasoning for why Moses basically, dies before he gets in the promised land. Now, the story in Numbers chapter 20 is the reason that is cited, that God cites that Moses cannot enter the promised land. But when you actually look at the story, and then you look at the kind of the repeating of the story, or the reasoning of the story, you actually get the impression that the story in Numbers chapter 20 and Deuteronomy's subsequent claim that something about that story earned Moses God's disapproval. You get the impression that these are actually an attempt to explain what was probably a long-standing tradition about a great leader who died on the east side of the river. Like, something must have happened. Moses is like the blueprint for Israel's leaders. And he dies before getting into the promised land. And you almost can hear these ancient communities struggling to grapple with, well, what happened that he died on the east side of the river? Because what is clear is that he does not make it into the promised land. And how is it that someone that is so revered and so special, the only one who got to see God face to face, this is their theology, the only one who got to see God face to face, how is it that he didn't make it into the promised land? Well, something must have happened that caused him not to be able to. He must have sinned, because when you don't receive the blessing, the reasoning is that there must have been some sin. And when they look back over his life, it's like, well, maybe it was that time when he was demanding water. This is in Numbers chapter 20. So, but you see this community of people trying to grapple with, why did this happen the way that it happened? Now, so the Great Commandment, after stating the 10 Commandments. Now, you know the Great Commandment from Jesus, right? When in Matthew, when the lawyer asks him, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, with all your strength, something like that. I forget, it's 4 things. Sorry, it's a bad paraphrase. Basically, love God with all you got. Okay, that's bottom line. And then the second is like unto it, which is love your neighbor as yourself. These are the 2 greatest laws, and on this hang all the law and the prophets. Basically, Jesus is taking the 10 commandments and he is summarizing them into 2 commandments. Well, where he gets that from is here in Deuteronomy. After stating the 10 commandments, Moses goes on. This is in Deuteronomy. Remember, Deuteronomy is kind of like a restatement. It's like regurgitating what you've heard in Leviticus and Numbers, but it makes some tweaks. After stating the 10 commandments, Moses goes on to encapsulate the essence of this Torah into one most notable passage in the Hebrew Bible, which is Deuteronomy 6, chapter 4, verse 5. And I'm going to look this up because I want to read this to you. You have heard it. Maybe you didn't know what that you had heard it, but it is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. And this is what it says. I'm reading from the New International Version. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Verse 5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. I'm going to continue to verse 9. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Basically, the greatest law is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. So we hear Jesus repeat this in Matthew. This is the most notable passage in the Hebrew Bible because it's considered the summation of all there is. Basically, love God with everything you got. The Jewish community calls this passage the Shema. Shema, S-H-E-M-A. Along with Deuteronomy 11:13-21 and Numbers 15:37-41, it is Judaism's prime prayer recited daily. Running fast behind me. Recited daily by observant Jews. So this passage, the Shema, along with an additional passage in chapter 11 in Deuteronomy and a passage in Numbers chapter 15, it is Judaism's prime prayer, and it is recited daily by observant Jews. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Now, the injunction to tie these words on the forehead and the forearm would keep the covenant always in front of each Israelite as a guide for everyday living. So I have this bracelet. This is one of my favorite bracelets. I don't know if it's going to come through clearly. I'm going to try. Hold on, I'll take it off. Mind you, I never take it off. Try to see if you can see those words, trying to make them clear. It's from Genesis chapter 28, verse 8. 28, verse 8. And so this comes from Reverend Ike. This was one of his most favorite pieces, and it says, God will provide. I don't know if you can see that or not. I don't think that's super clear, but I wear this all the time because I want to remind myself one of the things that I work with, and it's what attracted me to New Thought, but it's also the thing that I work with, which is prosperity. And so I remind myself that God will provide. So whenever I'm in a tight spot, God will provide. I can always know that God has my back. God will provide. It's that reminder. This injunction to tie the Shema to your forehead and to your forearm. What's your forearm? To your forearm, to tie it there. It is about keeping it in front of you every day. What do you use? And, I keep saying these people are no different from you and me. What do you use to keep the presence and the power of God in front of you every day? Every Lenten season, we give you guys a bracelet with, some powerful saying on it. This year was unlock your treasure. And on the inside, it said, I am the treasure. And so it was your reminder to basically keep this idea that there is treasure inside of me that is seeking to be unlocked, and it's in me. And all I got to do is claim that I am the treasure. One year we had I am abundant. Another one we had I am wealth. Another one I am love, or God and I are partners. We always win. Again, what do you use to keep your understanding of God in front of you, first and foremost in your mind, so that you never forget, so that in those moments when, I don't call them weak moments, but moments when you slips in consciousness, when you have those slips in consciousness, what do you use to get you back on track? And so for this ancient Israelite community, they tied them on their forearms, and they tied them on their foreheads. It was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to remember this. I don't ever want to forget that it's all about God. It's all about loving God with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my strength. Tefillin or phylacteries. This is what they were called. Tefillin or phylacteries. These were the small cases. So they were like a little case, and then the law was inside the case. So the tefillin or phylacteries is what goes in that blank. They were small cases that attached to the forehead and the forearm. They were called tefillin or phylacteries. Phylacteries is what goes in that blank. Mezuzah is a holder. So if you have gone to the home of a Jewish family, you will see it's called a mezuzah. You'll see the mezuzah on the door sill. And so it's this reminder. So when you're walking out, either consciously or subconsciously, your eye picks up the mezuzah. It's one more reminder of the law. It's one more reminder of what to keep at the forefront of your mind. Ray says, are these the items we see on Orthodox Jews? Yes. Oh, Andrea, I missed your comment. She said, that is a wonderful prayer, Rev. Utilizes two of my favorite principles, metaphysics and heart math. I got to get up to speed on this heart math. All right. We'll have to have a call. All right. All right, so let's talk about the place that Yahweh chooses. The place that Yahweh chooses. Okay. So Moses promoted loyalty to Yahweh by advocating the centralization of worship, the policy that Yahweh could not be worshiped in one place. Moses promoted loyalty to Yahweh by advocating the centralization of worship, the policy that Yahweh could not be worshiped in one place. I think that is a typo. I think that it's supposed to say only worshiped in one place, because that's what comes up with the second law, that there's this proliferation of worship around Israel. It was like, nope, let's bring it all into one place. Yeah, that's a typo. So Moses promoted loyalty to Yahweh by advocating the centralization of worship, the policy that Yahweh could only, so the word, instead of not, the word only should be there. Instead of not, the word only should be there. That Yahweh could only be worshiped in one place. And so why that's important is that this would eliminate the myriad local shrines dedicated to the ancestors and traditional Canaanite deities. This would eliminate myriad local shrines dedicated to the ancestors and traditional Canaanite deities. Canaanite deities is what goes in there. Essentially what's happening in this community is that you have, you know, the thing is that when someone gets, people that you're next to, you influence them and they influence you. You pick up their patterns and they pick up your pattern. And it's almost impossible not to. If you hang around me and Reverend Sherri, you'll hear us use the same phrasing and cadences and things like that. And some of that is her rubbing off on me, and some of that is me rubbing off on her. But if you hear us and then you hear us separately, or maybe you heard me, but then you heard her and you didn't know the two of us knew one another, and you would say, boy, you sound just like. And because what's happening is that you rub off on people. It's just what happens, that we influence one another. So what's happening with Israelite worship is that they're surrounded by these other Canaanite practices. And so you get this sense that, or this impression that the Israelites are trying to distinguish themselves from the other Canaanite deities. But really, a lot of the Canaanite religions are actually influences on the Israelite religion. And you see that when you get through the study of it, that and you look at other primary or secondary sources around that time. But there's still an emphasis inside the community to basically minimize the influences of these Canaanite religions that are all around them. It would be like, I don't know if you guys saw Crazy Rich Asians. I got a chance to see that on one of my plane rides back, I think from Miami or Nashville. No, I don't know, one of them. From Miami or Nashville. And I watched Crazy Rich Asians. And Ray said, loved it. It's a great movie. But you know how in the movie, this girl, she's Chinese. She's completely Chinese, but she was raised in America. And so she goes back to Singapore, and with her, which she will soon to be her fiance, and there is this whole test of authenticity. Well, she wasn't raised here. She doesn't know the practices. And so even though she's Chinese, like she's not mixed, she's not half American, half Chinese. She's simply a Chinese person raised in a different area, raised outside of Singapore. And so going back to that area, she has a hard time basically being accepted. And they actually kind of haze her. Well, that's kind of what's going on here. is that you've got the Israelites, they've got their practices, and there are these other communities that are having influence on them just by virtue of their proximity. It's like being a Muslim in America. Like you're coming here and you have your practices, you have the way that you do things, but you're in America, so you get influenced by American values, you get influenced by the way things are done in America, and it starts to creep into your spiritual practice. It starts to creep into your spiritual practice. Alita said, so they're trying to set apart. That's exactly what's happening. They're trying to set apart, because when you touch something, metaphorically and physically, it rubs off on you. It leaves its residue on you. And so what they're saying, what they're trying to ward off is all the residue that's being left on them by these local Canaanite religions that are all around them, that are part of their commerce, that are part of them doing business. They're interacting with these communities and they're being influenced by it. And how many of you have not seen something from another spiritual community that you were like, this is really good? You know, I know when I really began to understand that Muslims pray 5 times a day, I was like, I get that. That's a great practice. We should do that. We need to be praying all day long. Like, we need that kind of discipline. But those things begin to, influence how you do things. And they're trying to guard against that. The other reason that he wanted to centralize worship is that it would also allow supervision of all legitimate worship practices and reap the material benefits for the support of the priesthood. It would also allow supervision of all legitimate worship practices and reap the material benefits for the support of the priesthood. You know, the thing is that, and I get why religions take a hard line. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but I get why they take a hard line, because when you go on this spiritual path, as you're seeking, things come to you. I had an instance recently where someone visited a church and they basically wrote me a really kind letter and said, I won't be back. I was like, okay, all right. Tell me why. And they had been invited by somebody from a church to a meeting, and at that meeting they were talking about tarot cards and they were talking about all kinds of other spiritual practices. And it didn't matter that we don't practice those things at our church, and neither do we teach those things, but they were invited by somebody who's a member of the church, so they're thinking, well, this is what y'all teach. And it is an interesting space, because we don't take a hard line on anybody's spiritual practice. We're not anti-tarot cards. We're not anti any other practices. We teach prayer, we teach the Bible, and we teach metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. That all these other practices, tapping and chanting, these aren't part of our modalities, but we don't have any problem with them, meaning that there's no, if your spiritual search leads you to that, go with God. Like all of spirituality is about getting you to the innermost part of yourself. And if one of those other modalities works for you, work with it, figure that out. But as for me and my house, like, it's like you have to draw the line and say what you're going to be about. And we've drawn a line to say this is what we're going to be about, but not at all damning or condemning or putting down or banning any of those other practices, that if they suit you, if your soul is calling for it, walk down that road if your soul is calling for it. So what's happening here with the Deuteronomos, or the second law, Deuteronomy, is that we got to do something about all these outside influences. People, I don't know what what all of the other practices were, but people are getting into tarot cards, and they're getting into this, and they're getting into that, and so they're drawing this hard line. No. You only worship in one place. You got to come to the tabernacle at the time, and later it's going to be the temple. But you got to come to the tabernacle. Worship centers traditionally were located on hills or other high places, or in forest groves. Worship centers traditionally were located on hills or other high places, or in forests and groves. So again, these are the places where these other worship services were had. And so they're saying, no, everybody come into the tabernacle. The Israelites were warned against using traditional Canaanite high places because of the danger of syncretism. Because of the danger of syncretism. Syncretism is what goes in that blank, which means blending the worship of Yahweh, blending Yahwism with Baalism or some other foreign religious element, even in unintentional ways. That it's kind of like the Chinese mother who is authentic Chinese, really don't speak a whole lot of English. She's in America raising her Chinese daughters, has a Chinese father, but now she in unintentional ways, she's picking up these American customs, and it doesn't really become, she's an outsider in the US, and it's obvious that she is not native to the US, but when she goes back to China, you can see all of the different ways that the American culture has influenced this Chinese girl. So again, the Israelites, they're warned against traditional Canaanite high places because of the danger of syncretism. That if you're even in the place where it's happening, you might sync up with some of those practices. And so it's the blending of Yahwism and Baalism or some other foreign religious element, even in unintentional ways. So a prophet like me, whereas other nations employed diviners, sorcerers, and soothsayers to hear a divine voice, Israel was not allowed to use such means. Instead, Israel would hear God through a prophet. So if you were going to hear the voice of God, it was going to come to you through someone like a Moses. It was not going to be somebody casting lots. It was not going to be somebody chanting. It was not going to be somebody reading the stars. That if you were going to hear the divine voice, the only way that you would hear God would be through a prophet. So they were drawing a line in the sand to say, we practice this and not that. And incidentally, and I was having this conversation with Reverend Sherri, because we were talking about, we got to, think about, okay, what does that mean? Because basically the person said, hey, we're not coming back to your church. So what is the position that we take with our, members of the church and things like that? And, we were talking about, something about seeking. And at some point you got to drill down somewhere. At some point you got to say, this is where I'm going to plant roots and I'm going to master here. Because the truth is that in order to get to God, you got to go deep. Meaning that you got to go deep in a specific area. You could choose New Thought Christianity as we teach it, but you could choose something else. But you got to go deep in it to get to the presence and the power of God inside of you, to really get to that magical place in yourself. That place that transcends. And something happens when you're like over here and over there and over here and over there, is that you never go deep, that you never get grounded in any particular teaching. And so your spiritual life remains shallow. And it doesn't mean that you don't get benefit from all of these different things that you're practicing, but there is a mastery that's not the word I want to get. There is a depth to your spiritual practice, your spiritual walk, that comes from mastery in a particular area. And so what we're encouraging people to do is choose where you're going to be and then drill down. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with any of these other practices, but what you're trying to get to, you want the fruit on the branches. You want the deepest part of yourself in expression. And as long as you remain on the surface, never really drilling down in any one of these practices, you never get to the richness of who you really are. You get glimpses of it, but you never get to your true work. And you want your true work. What is mine to do and uniquely mine to do? What is mine to do that when I tap into it, that I shut out everything else? Right now we're in the season of Simone Biles. It's one of my favorite things to watch. That level of mastery in your area of gifting, in your zone of genius, is available for you. But you don't get there flitting here and flitting there and going everywhere. You got to choose, pick, and drill down. that you know, Simone Biles, I don't know what other sports she was good at, but she had to say no to those other sports, and she had to say no to those other things in order to say yes to the level of excellence that she's drilling down on right now in gymnastics. So it will be the same thing for you, that there is, you got work to do. You ain't got time to play around with this. You have work to do. You have gifts and talents inside of you that please don't go to the grave with them. And we take them to the grave when we refuse to go deep. VJ says, I grew up, oh, I'm sorry, you gave that to me privately. I apologize, VJ. I done exposed it now. She said, I grew up going deep, but I was not exposed that there were other options, but now I'm exposed that there are. Yes. My apologies. I noticed after I read it that it was a private message. Sorry. Okay, moving back in. The people could not stand up under the intensity of direct contact with God. The people could not stand up under the intensity of direct contact with God, but thought they would die. So they chose to hear through a prophet because the idea or the responsibility of going to God for themselves, they thought would actually kill them. Now, that may seem crazy to us, but I want you to know that I came from a family, true story, true story. I came from a family that believed that if you got enough knowledge, that you would have a nervous breakdown. And when my mom was getting ready to go to graduate school with the intent of having a PhD, her parents, one of her parents, literally cautioned her against getting too much knowledge and having a nervous breakdown. And for a good part of my mom's early adulthood, there was worry that she was going to hit that tipping point and have that nervous breakdown. So I'm not laughing at it. We laugh about this now, but these are some of the patterns that were passed down in the family. So if it seems crazy that they thought they would die if they talked to God, just know that there's a family that came from the deep south that thought they would die if they got too much knowledge. Moses mediated between God and Israel. He became the enduring Deuteronomic model for prophetic communication between God and his people. Moses mediated. Remember what I said? He was like the paradigm. When the Bible is unusual in its praise of him. A lot of times when you see leaders, they're presented with all of their flaws. Nobody's trying to like whitewash them or make them seem better than they were. But with Moses, you do get a little bit of that, where almost like they're trying to make him seem better than he is, or they're just praising him. They're effusive in their praise of him. So he became the enduring model for prophetic communication between God and his people. The criteria for true and false prophecy were the wait and see test. The criteria for true and false prophecy were the wait and see test. In the Deuteronomic perspective, prophecy predicted future events. If a prophecy was genuine, it would come to pass. So all we got to do is wait and see. That we'll know if the prophet is authentic by whether or not what he says actually comes to pass. The earliest creed, which you find in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 5 through 9, there are three major historical moments that are evoked in this sketch of Israel's early history. The first is the patriarch Jacob. The second is Israel's experience in Egypt. And the third is the conquest of Canaan. So what's happening here is that Deuteronomy is extending the covenant code prohibition. Oh, no. I'm going ahead. I want to give you something else. I want to go to the next one before I give you that note. So choose life. Remember I said this was that iconic speech, choose life. It's in chapter 30, verses 15 to 20, brings together the big covenant themes of the book, the commandment, the obedience, the blessing and the cursing, the promise and the fulfillment. And then Moses demands a decision from each member of the community. Moses demands a decision from each member of the community. And remember, this is, if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 to 20. This is going to sound very familiar to Joshua, but remember, Joshua gets framed as almost a carbon copy of Moses. So in verses 15 to 20, it says, "See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commandments, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. The day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses, this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So he's saying you need to make a decision. What you gonna do? You need to make a decision. Deuteronomy is perhaps the most deliberately theological book in the Hebrew Bible. It is probably the most deliberately theological book in the Hebrew Bible. This idea of Israel as God's choice, it occurs for the first time in Deuteronomy. This idea of God's choice, it appears for the first time in Deuteronomy. And then you have the law. So remember I said with Deuteronomy that there's all this that they restate things that we've heard in Leviticus and Numbers, but they bring this human element to it. And so with the theological teaching of Deuteronomy, you get kind of three phrases that kind of sum it up. One is like a practical monotheism, right? So it's bringing all the worship into one place, and basically naming all the other places on the hills and the high places as heretical or not of God to worship there. And then this distinction, one people, and it's addressed to the people of God as a whole. There is no distinction between the southern and the northern kingdoms that you're going to see later in scripture, nor are there distinctions made among tribes. Now, the other thing is that this humanistic thing. So the law, you have the laws that are restated, the laws of the tithe, the 7th year release of debt, rules for the release of slaves, rules for 3 festivals. These are all ancient laws, and they occur in Exodus, but they appear in Deuteronomy with modifications. For example, in Deuteronomy, the Israelite debt slave comes out of servitude with generous gifts from the owners. And you don't get that in Exodus. In Exodus, he's released in 7 years, but in Deuteronomy, he's released and he gets some generous gifts from the person he repaid the debt to. You see later in the Deuteronomic school of thought, they're extending the covenant code that prohibits afflicting a resident alien. So you get in Leviticus, I think it's in Leviticus, that they say, don't afflict the resident alien. But in Deuteronomy, there is this insistence that the Israelite refrain not just from afflicting them, but actually must love the resident alien. And resident alien is basically foreigners living in your land. It's interesting reading this now in this debate that we're in right now. But you must love the resident alien, and you must provide concrete legal benefits, food, and so on for the resident alien. Is that not the battle that's being fought right now, or one of the battles that's being fought right now? And so what Deuteronomy is saying is that, no, don't just not mistreat them. Make sure they've got legal rights, make sure they've got enough food. Basically, it's almost like give them the rights of citizenship. And this argument is going on in, again, because we treat the Bible as if it's like a harmonious thought process, but it's many different trains of thought that are in there. And so in the Deuteronomic code, you get a covenant code, you get this idea of all people being a people of God and being inclusive, that we're not turning away foreigners. And then you get one faith, and this is a uniformity in worship. There's a uniformity in worship. And something I want to say about the Deuteronomic school, we're not saying an actual school. What we're saying is that there is this long tradition, like it's a school of thought, but not necessarily a school like the Princeton School of Divinity or the Harvard Divinity School or whatever. We're saying that it is a school of thought or a tradition of thought. And this tradition of thought sometimes may span over many centuries. It doesn't have to be like, a single fixed period of time. The compositional setting of the book, that is when it was written down, differs from its surface setting, meaning that when it was written versus when the story actually took place are completely different. The core of Deuteronomy, which is chapters 5 through 26, was written sometime during the Israelite monarchy. We think as early as the reign of Hezekiah or as late as the reign of Josiah. So somewhere in there during the monarchy, that core came together. Now, Deuteronomy doesn't contain a lot in the way of civil law. It actually focuses more on moral and religious prescriptions. And again, that you see that with how do you treat slaves when they come out of slavery? How do you treat your foreigners that are living in your land? There's evidence from the book that suggests that the writer came from the northern kingdom and reflects the traditions from the northern kingdom. There's evidence from the book that suggests that the writer came from the northern kingdom. Now, Deuteronomy, if you read chapter 1, verse 1, it opens with, "These are the words of Moses." And that phrase is actually written from the perspective of someone inside the promised land. And we know that Moses never made it into the promised land. So the book doesn't claim Mosaic authorship. Let me say that. The book doesn't claim Mosaic authorship, and none of the books claim Mosaic authorship. That's a tradition that comes later. But a lot of people, when you talk to them and how they've been taught, is as if Moses wrote those first 5 books. But none of the books claim Mosaic authorship. And Deuteronomy, which is probably the one that maybe you could guess was Moses, is written in first person, but it opens with, "These are the words of Moses," and then it goes on to say some stuff that's written like somebody sitting inside the promised land looking out. Like, I'm inside the promised land, let me tell you how we got here. And then they go on to write this story in first person. Writers in antiquity didn't have the same rules that we have today. So if I wrote a story today, no. Stop sharing. Okay. If I wrote a story today, I want to make sure I'm still recording. Yes. If I wrote a story today, and I said, okay, so I'm going to write this story, and I'm going to write it first person in the voice of Barbara Macaulay. I'm saying that because she's on the line. I'm going to write it first person in the voice of Barbara Macaulay. Y'all be like, no, Reverend Sherri, that's plagiarism. You can't do that. That's not how this goes. But they didn't have those kinds of rules in antiquity, that it was honoring the person to write in the person's voice. Barbara Macaulay says, LOL, truly. So this idea of authorship in the way that we think about it is not the same way that it was thought about in antiquity. We just don't have those same rules that guide us versus what was guiding the writers then. So for us, it's important that it was Mosaic authorship. I don't know that it was important to that community, because if it was, they would have identified who the writer was. The writer is committed to revitalizing the faith and the practice of Israel and views himself as standing in the tradition of Moses. The writer is committed to revitalizing the faith and the practice of Israel and views himself as standing in the tradition of Moses. So when we talk about the tradition of Moses, again, Moses becomes the paradigm for Israel's prophets and how they communicate the word of God to the people. And so you see that in prophets later, when they're written about it, they're written in light of Moses. Trying to think someone who's an iconic, president. People have a love affair with Ronald Reagan. And so people talk about Reaganomics, and there is all this emphasis, and that people will come and they want to locate themselves next to Reagan. And you even have Democrats who, in opposing party, will come and locate themselves in relation to Reagan. That the decisions, good, bad, or indifferent, that he made from a political standpoint, it's political currency to relate yourself to Ronald Reagan. So Moses kind of sits in that light, like he is a paradigm that people fit in. Before Reagan, it was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, with the New Deal and all of the social programs that he instituted, and all of that good stuff that he lifted whole communities of people out of poverty with the programs that were instituted under his leadership. He was a stabilizing force, and as the only president in our history that served 4 terms. So he is, very like a paradigm. So Moses is a paradigm like that for later prophets. And so we'll see this because we're going to go to Joshua next. But Moses crosses the Reed Sea. Joshua crosses the Jordan River, and they cross in similar ways, where Moses raises out his hand and the waters separate and stand in a heap, and they're able to walk through. Well, that's the same thing that happens in the Jordan River when they cross over into the Promised Land. Moses has what's called a theophany, meaning hearing the voice of God, a theophany. He has a theophany at the burning bush that basically says that you're on holy ground, take off your shoes. And he has this encounter with God face to face. Well, Joshua's encounter isn't face to face, but he also has a theophany after he crosses the Jordan River, where he's told that he's on holy ground and to take off his shoes. Moses mediates a covenant with God at Mount Sinai on behalf of the Israelites. Joseph mediates a renewal of that covenant at Shechem. Moses sends out spies to investigate the Promised Land. Joshua sends out spies to investigate the Promised Land. In battle, Moses would hold out the rod during battle, and when he held it out, the Israelites would fight on, and they would gain ground. And if his arm fell, they would lose ground. Joshua, when they're in battle, he does the same thing. He holds out a javelin, and when he holds out that javelin, the Israelites fight on, because that's their assurance from God that they are going to win. So again, you get this shaping of Joshua almost like he is this carbon copy. Moses is this paradigmatic leader. He starts in Exodus, and we follow him all the way through to Deuteronomy. He is, for all intents and purposes, the Torah. Like he is it. And then Deuteronomy comes in, and it retells a lot of the things that we already saw in Leviticus and Numbers as far as the law, but it brings this caring human element to it. So don't just be nice to foreigners. Make sure they got legal rights. Make sure they got enough food, enough housing. Like, take care of the foreigners and love them. Like, that's what it says. Don't just not hurt them. You need to love the foreigners that are living with you. With the slave coming out of debt, out of their servitude. They don't just come out of servitude empty-handed. They come out of servitude with generous gifts. You got to help them get back on their feet. It's almost like what happens to the prisoners when they come out of prison. You don't just let them just come out. You got to have a plan and a program to get them back on their feet. So again, the second law comes in and it has a more caring aspect than what you see in the more legalistic language as you see in Leviticus and in Numbers. That is our conversation for tonight. Any questions on the Deuteronomy, on the Deuteronomic law? Thank you. Jonathan says, great analogy, Reverend Sherri. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions on the Deuteronomos is what it's called. That's the Greek word for, that means second law. Next week, we're going to pick up with Joshua and Judges. Joshua and Judges. So that goes from page 46 to 48. Joshua and Judges is where we're going to go next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Any questions, let me know. And that is it. Ray says fascinating. Isn't this Bible amazing? Can't you see why I love it? It's just so awesome. It's just the most awesomest thing. All right. Thank you guys for tonight. God bless you. Have a great night. And I just take this information and use it, and may it bless your life. And thank you to everybody who's watching after this live broadcast. God bless.